Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today as we are in conversation with the author Adam Schwartz. Um, Welcome to an evening with us, Adam, and thank you for sharing your time with us. Adam Schwartz is the author of The Rest of the World. Um, Adam's stories have won the Washington Writers Publishing House 2020 Prize for Fiction, Poets and Writers WEX Award, and his stories have been widely published in renowned magazines and newspapers. Before we jump more into this conversation, I just wanted to mention that we are in a webinar. Feel free to use the chat box to post your comments, to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from and what your interest in Adam's book is. You feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box, and you can also upvote questions that you like. Um, we have closed captioning enabled, and you can choose to turn it off if you would like to turn it off. This event is being recorded and will be available in our YouTube channel in a day or two. Post this conversation, we will send out a survey, and please do respond to it and fill it out. Adam's book, The Rest of the World, is available for purchase at Barnes and Nobles in Columbia and Ellicott City. It is also available to buy online through Books with a Past, and I'll be posting those links out to you too. And now a little bit about Adam. Adam has observed hundreds of kids in 22 years teaching in Baltimore public schools. He's watched them learn about love, handle dilemmas, and try to work out where they fit in life. And out of his experience has emerged 8 short stories, which are compiled in his new book, uh, The Rest of the World. The heroes in this acclaimed story collection are kids coming of age in Baltimore, in a Baltimore that owes them better. These teen or young adults rescue loved ones, they plot hustles, seek redemption, and refuse to give into despair. As our country grapples with who we are and values we aspire to, this collection offers stories about resilient teens growing up in neighborhoods ravaged by systemic inequities. So, Adam, would you like to share with us what actually inspires you to write stories about the lives of the students in your school?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on this snowy evening. When I think about why I'm drawn to create the kinds of characters I do and why working with students at school inspires me to write these stories, I would say that increasingly over the years, I've come to sort of see the world, at least sometimes, I've come to sort of see the world through students' eyes in as much as I can from time to time. And and what do I see when I do that? Well, some of what I see um, is picture a neighborhood that's been historically redlined, that's been economically isolated, that's been municipally neglected, that's been subjected to the policies of mass incarceration, that's got iffy transportation and few job prospects, that is sometimes exploited by the local media with lurid crime coverage for the purpose of gaining viewers on TV or readers in the newspaper. So you picture that as a backdrop. Now picture all the homes with all the families full of love and the patchwork of matriarchs and patriarchs trying to hold it together in the face of these systemic entrenched inequities. And finally, I would just say this: now picture the children in the same setting, because it's the kids, it's the children who have to figure this maze out, who have to navigate this obstacle of what are sometimes really complex challenges. And so much of that weight is carried by the children. And so much is expected of them at a really young age. And Baltimore can just be an astonishingly hard place for kids to grow up, not for all kids, but for some. You know, what I often say is you don't have to be a writer or a teacher to be, you know, inspired by watching kids strive for better in the face of these kinds of obstacles.
Uh, I do. I I understand what you're saying about, you know, we've had a lot of discussions around redlining and how communities a community impacts a child's growth. And so as we move on, just so that everybody here can get a sense of your style and how you about a little bit about your book, could you please read us something and share with us one of your stories?
Yes, thank you. So I'm just going to read the first two short scenes from the opening story in my book. And the title of the story is Pavan for a Dead Princess. Well, I think of that time before everything got crazy, and I see Missy Ha like she was then, 19 with a heart-shaped face, teeth like fine china, and a little girl's giggle for something she knew that you didn't. Other girls tried so hard to make themselves look cute. Missy was pretty just because. And in that smile that stayed in her eyes, you thought you might see something better in yourself. They were Koreans, her family, with a carryout up the hill. You'd see their neon walk throwing off samurai blades of sunshine, blinking out the words, Democratic Best, before you even got there. The Haas, most of them anyway, lived in the neighborhood, either above the store or next door. When you stepped up to order your food, the Haas weren't hiding behind some plexiglass cocoon, buzzing their own in and out. They took your order like real people, face to face, talking about whatever, the sewer grate at the curb, puffing rotten eggs again, or how nobody's giving Obama a chance, or that crazy 2012 movie that had some people so shook you couldn't tell them it was made up. Summers, the Haas hosed off their front sidewalks and eased hustlers off their corners and chilled outside on the sidewalk, reading Korean newspapers, oohing and eyeing over someone's new baby, and always tidying their roses. The Haas did a lot for those roses, gave them bone meal and lime, spritz from a mister, nailed little wooden slats into the brick to help them climb, then talked those vines halfway up the front of the house. Every June, they hosted a block party where they cooked out for the whole neighborhood, hamburgers, hot dogs, lemons stuck through with peppermint sticks, even short ribs if you went early enough. You'd smell the charcoal meat for blocks and you knew it was summer. In the fall, Sundays especially, they represented in purple Ravens jerseys, just like a lot of people. The one they call Unc with the spiky hair might even cross the street and take a rip of whatever was going around, Henny or Grey Goose, and then lose a few dollars playing spades in his checkered trim chef's shirt. Everyone liked the Haas. They were good people. Like I said, real people. But none would have told here meant they wanted Missy mixing with the customers. And that's what I was, a customer. Regular enough, they even called me by my favorite order, number 5, for the spicy yakame. Well, everything changed after Maha caught Missy showing me her book of drawings. We were low on the back steps and the big spiral lay in my lap. She kept reaching across my side to flip the pages, embarrassed for me to look too hard. My heart jumped each time she pressed against me, snug. Missy's drawings were wild. They were on thick paper, some in rubbed charcoal, others she'd painted freehand in peaches and grays that had crinkled the edges. Lines might be twine thin or much bolder. The people in them were open leather vests, mesh garters, push-ups, bustiers. A couple of the chicks even had their titties out. Jealousy's a nasty feeling, starts eating you up even when it's got no call. And I could feel my face getting hot because you wouldn't think Missy was that kind of girl. She saw my pinched eyes and flipped the page, But the next page was just as crowded with other half-naked people. I took off my baseball cap and stroked my hair forward. "What kind of parties you been going to?" I asked. She cringed, scrunching up her shoulders, then palmed back a giggle. "Something funny?" I asked. All the smothered laughter just went into her eyes. I was about to say something really crude. "Whatever," I said. She rocked forward, caught herself, and came up laughing. "They're not real, Bahia," she said. I rapped a knuckle on the page. "They must have come from somewhere," I said. "Relax," she said, her smile fading. "They're only in my head." The kitchen fan was softly venting out, its blades a ghostly whirl of sooty vinegar blowing through the alley. "Don't you believe me?" she asked. "They don't look like nobody's strangers to me." I started redoing the laces on my tennis. "They look real, like true blue people," I said. "No, sweetie." She slipped a gentle hand behind my neck. "It's art," she said. "Art?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Made up." "Oh," I said, unsure if this made it better. Then turning a page, I realized there was something off in the way she'd drawn these people, some faraway look in their faces, like how mannequins got their feelings missing. "But these kind of dirty, aren't they?" I asked. "Like obscene?" she said. "Like someone might think you easy peasy," I said. She dropped her eyes and looked away. "Just because I stay inside doesn't mean I'm boring," she said. I turned another page, starting to feel dumb for getting heated. "Why do you draw this stuff anyway?" I asked. She did not answer right away. "I shouldn't have brought them out here," she said. We were quiet, and it's hard to explain because it's been a while now, but I still wonder about those pictures and the sad feeling they gave off and what those lost oval faces were looking for. Then Maha stepped out, cracked an old mop handle against the iron railing, and called sharply in Korean. I felt then like she'd been watching us. Missy yanked away the spiral, slammed it shut, and popped up. Clanging up those metal stairs to go inside, Missy's legs sounded heavy and her head was down, and Maha was just standing there, giving me the stink eye. Like Missy, Maha had been pretty once too. You could tell. But now Maha's cheeks drooped and her dark eyes rested in little bowls of purple. You got the feeling she was mad at Missy for rocking what she'd lost. Well, after that, whenever I came around, something caught in Maha's face soon as she saw me, and I just knew she was downing me inside her head. I'd be thinking, is he looking at me sideways, or is that just your pan face? Whatever it was, Maha made sure to shoo Missy away to sweep up the back or grumbled for more ice, and Maha, or maybe Unk, would finish my order like they were trying to hurt someone before hurrying me out. Sometimes the food wasn't even cooked right. Thank you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Rohini. You're muted.
That story really sparked an interest in me, and I really felt that I would like to know a little bit more about Missy and the narrator, Bahia,
Yeah,
or Order Number Five, as
yes,
you called him.
yes. Um,
Could you tell us a little bit more about this story?
yeah, so the narrator of the story, Bahia, he's a young man, and when he was a child, his father was deported. His mother's not really in his life, so he's come up kind of hard, and essentially has been orphaned. And when the story opens, he's 19 or 20, and he falls in love with the daughter of the Korean merchants who run the carryout store in the neighborhood, and her name is Missy. And as the story indicates from the part I read, the Missy's parents like him fine as a customer, but they don't like him as a suitor for their daughter. So they have to carry on kind of secretively. Um, and then on a particular night, it looks like things might really be lining up for the narrator and falling into place for him. And he makes a fateful mistake that he might have avoided. Readers can decide when they read it. And so after that, complications ensue. I won't give away more than that. But I will say a violin begins to play a very prominent role in the narrator's life.
I did like, the way Bahaya was explaining his thoughts, as you captured that so eloquently. What was going through in his mind as he was going through Missy's sketchbook and her drawings.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
there is, I guess, in all of us, there is this kind of underlying sense of, we all do it, kind of assumptions that we kind of make, and your characters have to deal with a lot of those kind of assumptions that are made about them too.
Yeah, yeah, I'm often struck by, it's not always true, but it is sometimes true, um, of among the young men I meet at school. Again, it's not always true, but it's sometimes true that sometimes the young men at school wear a kind of hard exterior. They have this kind of hard exoskeleton that includes a sort of flattened affect, and a kind of a look that sometimes feels like they're looking right through you. And that hard exterior I find often melts away, pretty quickly once I get to know students. But I think some kids are conditioned to kind of wear this hard exterior, as a kind of defense mechanism. But I'm always struck that it in no way reflects their true selves. And often, there's all kinds of vulnerabilities that the kids are um, are willing to expose, once that exterior falls away. Um, yeah.
The other, you talked about vulnerability, and one of the other sides of that coin of vulnerability is also resilience. And one of your characters says, but you can't erase nothing, you just carry it along. And I found that really, really profound, and it speaks so strongly to resiliency. Can you share something more about the character who said this, or about this thread of resiliency that runs through your stories?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the character who says this is like his way of kind of coming to terms with what he's lost, while also trying to fashion a way forward for himself. Um, and I would say that that kind of dynamic, is sort of true in a lot of the stories in my book. Um, uh, as I was saying earlier, a lot of the kids I get to meet at school, again, not all of them, but a lot of them deal with all sorts of instabilities, and go through a lot. Um, and and I'm just frequently impressed by the kind of will and determination and refusal to give in to despair that young people demonstrate, when I get to know them at school. Um,
So at this point, I'm going to interject one of the questions which is also in my mind that somebody in the audience has asked.
mhm.
There's a question from Kathy that asks you is, are your characters based on your students that you have had or people you have known in your life? How many of the stories are autobiographical?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Um, so I, I probably couldn't have written these stories without the years of experience, as a teacher in Baltimore classrooms. Um, but there's only one story in the book that is strictly autobiographical and is actually told. The title of that story is U.S. History, and it's told from the perspective of a school teacher, and it takes place in a classroom with some flashbacks mixed in. So there's only one story in the book that's strictly autobiographical, but again, my experiences getting to know students at school, really inform um, so much of these stories. But there is the story that I began reading tonight. The narrator's name is Bahia. There is no Bahia in real life, and the events that are told in the book are fictional. But again, that character is informed by my experiences of getting to know students.
Thank you. So, is there any character or story that you kind of wanted to put in, but you kind of left out? Is there anything that is, left unsaid in your book?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that whenever I finish a story that I'm like reasonably content with, that I feel like I can live with, I always feel like it's a bit of a small miracle, and I literally am never sure whether I'll be able to pull it off again. Um, I'm always uncertain whether I'll be able to pull another story together that will have the kinds of effects that I hope it would have. So to answer your question, I would just say that I've got a bunch of other stories that are in various stages of development, some closer to being done than others. And, a bunch of those stories could have fit in this book thematically. They would have fit in the book. They just weren't ready.
Well, we look forward to when those stories are ready
Yeah, thank
and
you.
we get to read them.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh, I would jump onto this other question. There's that always comes up, and that's the question of cultural appropriation. And many writers and publishers wrestle with it. And so, what would you say to readers who might be offended that a white author is creating stories about Black characters? We've often, there has been, American Dirt is a prime example. So there has been a lot of kind of diverse opinions on cultural appropriation.
Right, right. Yes, I'm very aware of this issue. I think about it a lot. I hear from readers or editors about it a lot, and I'm certainly not deaf to these kinds of criticisms. And I worry about it. I do worry sometimes whether I've trespassed by creating characters whose struggles can't be disconnected, from our country's ugly, vile history of racial injustice. So I do think about it. I mean, here's basically what I would say about it. Artists who perpetuate stereotypes or exploit the pain of another culture for their own gain should be condemned. Um, Artists who trade or borrow from the oppression of another group, you know, without sensitivity, should also be called out. Um, I mean, I would just say that I try and kind of hold myself to certain guidelines when I write these stories. Don't traffic in stereotypes. Don't pathologize the urban poor. Um, don't lose, keep in mind the context of the sort of historical struggles Black folks have endured in this country. Um, Create rich, complex characters for whom race is but one strand in their identity. So I try and hold myself to certain guidelines, but I mean, it is tricky. I don't know. I mean, if I got a name, I don't know. I mean, if these are the stories I seemed I am bound to tell. They're the stories that seized me and that demanded to be told and took hold of me. And um, you know, for that, I don't think there's anything I can do anything about it uh, about that. But I'm certainly aware of the issue, and I think about it all the time.
It's also your lived experience as a teacher who has been interacting and on a everyday basis. So it is also your perspectives and your lived experience.
Yeah.
Um, your guidelines that you were mentioning, and I was just thinking about them as you were talking about them. I think those are guidelines that are good for everybody, not just an author. Staying away from stereotypes,
Right.
and a kind of valuing the complexity of every person rather than just making it to one common denominator. I
Right.
think those are guidelines for that have a broad application.
Right.
So
Yeah. And you know, the issue of race gets kind of highlighted um, in my work sometimes, but I would say that the students I meet at school are multidimensional, multifaceted, and you know, offer really kind of disparate presentations of humanity and consciousness, um, uh, regardless of you know, there's sort of heterogeneity around race. So race is just one strand among the students at school. They are each unique. The students at school are each unique individuals with really widely varied interests, personalities, etc. Um, so sometimes it just seems like it just feels sort of reflexive for to talk about the sort of racial piece here, but I certainly get it. Yeah.
and a lot of stuff that you talk about, that shield that they put on. I have a teen, and I know that he has it too. So
Yeah.
it's
Right.
kind of
Right. Right.
like maybe something that is inherent at that age, because you're so vulnerable at that age too.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
I was the other day, you had written a piece for the Baltimore Sun, and as in our county, as across the country, there's this raging conversation on reopening schools, virtual schools, hybrid schools. Should we not? And you had said that virtual school is almost school, and that's not good enough.
Mhm.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about your perspective on digital school and what your experiences have been. What do you feel?
Yeah. So um, distance learning is a platform that that has really left a lot of my students behind. Um, Over half the students in my classroom have stopped attending or never began. So um, it's really it's really a platform that leaves a lot of students at my school behind. And I don't know. I mean, I think the isolation, of course, is hard on everybody. I think it's especially hard on kids, and then I would say that I think it's especially hard on kids who are dealing with the kinds of instabilities and challenges that a lot of kids in Baltimore are dealing with. So we have all these synonyms for distance learning, remote learning, virtual learning, distance learning, e-learning, and the terms kind of hint at these sort of slick technologies that have transformed our lives, but they're not actually able to kind of reproduce the connectedness of a real learning community. They're miraculous, these innovations, but they can't really reproduce the connectedness that would take place in a real classroom with real kids interacting with their peers and a teacher. Um, so yeah, it's definitely a crisis for students at my school, the way it's kind of leaving them out. Um,
While before we started our conversation, we were discussing, and you had mentioned about how during school, a lot of your students would just walk in, open the door, and just spend maybe a minute with you, or just a little bit of time to just stop by, say hello, and how important you felt that was, even though it wasn't like a whole meaningful conversation happened, but just that dropping by is something that you felt added so much of value.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this. I was thinking about in normal times before the pandemic, I was thinking about all the sort of fleeting kind of very brief interactions I would have with students during the day, some who might be in my class, some who might not be in my class. And I was thinking about how students like they often kind of pop into my classroom like before classes start and I'm getting ready, or during lunchtime, or even after school, and how those interactions are really brief and unscripted and fleeting. And I never gave much thought to them, but when I think of them now, they're totally absent kind of from the distance learning platform. They just don't happen. And I kind of miss them. And they were they were sort of one of the ingredients that would make the school day feel sort of meaningful or fulfilling. And I hardly noticed them when they were going on, and now that they're not there, I miss them.
I think a lot of teachers would be with you on that, as well as a lot of students.
Right,
So I hope we start opening up in whichever way, but we do it safely for teachers, because I do know teachers are concerned.
right,
Too.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's a real conundrum. I mean, um, I can say both things at once. Distance learning, doesn't serve my students very well, leaves many of them behind. And I can also say that I am wary of returning to in-person learning in my classroom. And, here in my house with my wife and son, we've been careful here really careful the last year. We don't socialize with friends. We don't visit with family. We limit how much we go in stores a lot. So some of my cautiousness, no doubt, comes from my wife, who works at a hospital and here's all the bad stuff about COVID from doctors and researchers all day. um, but yeah, so both things can be true. Both things are real at once. I'm worried about the kids at school. Distance learning doesn't serve their needs, and I'm also very wary of going back in the classroom. Certainly, I want to be fully vaccinated before I go back in there.
I agree with that. And like I said, I have kids who go to school, and I can see that how much the lack of interaction. It wasn't like they were going to do anything great, but just looking at a friend and maybe just half a smile, or just a gesture or something, that kind of communication, like you said, is so important. This non-verbal or fleeting is the word you used, is so important.
Yes. Yeah.
And while we're talking about you as an author, I wanted to know who is your favorite author. And
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard for me to pick just one. I like so many authors and so many different books, but uh, Richard Ford is an author I love,
Mhm,
particularly his stories.
mhm,
John Edgar Wideman is an author I love. I named these two authors because I discovered them, many years ago when I was much younger. And although they're very different authors, um, the music of their sentences and their vision of the world has never left me. And it's almost like a kind of aesthetic touchstone that's kind of fixed in my mind um, because of the beauty of their work. Um, yeah, but I have a sort of maybe I'm kind of drawn. I write stories about kids coming of age, and I'm kind of drawn to reading stories about coming of age stories in which young people are made to sort of confront some hardness in the world and are initiated into some hardness of the world, which is of course something each of us undergoes in our own way
mhm.
as we grow up. But I'm very drawn to those kinds of stories.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will send out the names of both these authors in my follow-up email, because I'm sure we would be thumbing through them pretty soon.
Yeah,
Um, And you did mention briefly about how you had some unfinished stories, and is that your next writing project coming up?
So my my internal clock seems kind of innately wired to the pace of a short story in terms of writing. So yeah, I'm working on my next collection of stories. I recently had a couple stories accepted for publication that are not in the book and would go in my next book. And so that's always
That's
getting
exciting.
yeah, thank you. Getting those stories accepted. Ultimately, you want to put out a book, but getting the stories accepted in literary magazines or literary journals is always a big boost because it's just kind of uh, confirmation that that something's working in them.
Do you teach writing by any chance, since you're an author?
Yeah, I mean, I teach. I'm a high school English teacher, so I do both. As an ELA teacher, I'm basically teaching reading and writing skills all the time.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. We have a question from Carmen, and she wanted to know a little bit more about your writing process. Do you have a regular routine? Do the stories just come to you, or do you spend time outlining extensively?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I don't outline. I'll get sort of I'll get taken. A story will begin by me being taken by something. A particular perspective of a character that has suddenly entered my imagination, or it might be a particular conflict that has come to me. Um, but I don't outline. I try and write in the morning. I try and turn off my electronic devices because they're distracting. A really important um, part of my writing routine has been kind of interrupted by the pandemic, and that is that um, prior to the pandemic, I really like to leave the house to write and to take my laptop to Barnes and Noble or to Starbucks or to the library or to Wegmans sometimes, and just to get away from any distractions at home. And I find, when I'm outside the house writing, I don't, you know, I don't go online, so I don't get distracted by reading the Washington Post and start going down, internet
Doom
rabbit holes.
scrolling.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so I try and write in the morning. I like to get out of the house when I can to write. I try and turn off my electronic devices, get my phone away from me, because all those things kind of, there's just a million things in the world that will take you out of the sort of inner quiet you kind of need to write, or to take you out of yourself and distract you. And I feel kind of vulnerable to being distracted by things. So I have to work to put things away and get myself in a place where I won't be distracted.
I think I can relate to that because I sometimes I write blog posts for our library blog.
Mhm.
If I didn't have a deadline,
Right,
to just tell me that, okay, you've got to have it in by then, or,
right,
because I kind of do everything that you said, reading the Washington Post and every such thing. I do that.
right.
So I can understand a
Yeah,
lot about that.
yeah. Um,
There is a really interesting question from Margarita.
mhm.
She is asking, have you involved the children that you teach in writing their own stories?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, the blasted Common Core curriculum, uh, it sort of takes students away from writing about their own lives. And I think this is happening in school systems across the country and has been happening for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. There's this kind of shift in the last decade to asking students in ELA classes not so much to write about their own lives, but to write about what they read, of course, to write about the books that they read, to write about the text that they read. And I think part of the reason for that, of course, is that if high school students intend to go on to college, most of the writing you do in college is often about what you have read. So much of the curriculum requires students to write about the books they read or the texts they read, which is disappointing to me because I often find the most interesting student writing to read is when they write about their own lives and their own experiences. And so I try and create assignments along the way that I can kind of slip in or tuck in that aren't necessarily in the curriculum, that ask students to write about their own experiences or write about their own perspectives on a given topic. And that's often my favorite writing to read. I would also add on this topic that I've written a little bit about the way the media in cities tends to, the way the media reports crime and the way the media tends to kind of criminalize Black men, criminalize whole communities at a time, and to present viewers on the nightly news or even in the newspaper with this kind of lurid crime coverage that's designed to kind of make us lean in, and it's often delivered on the nightly news as breaking news. And I always want to yell at the TV, how breaking could it be when the story only lasts, the crime story lasts 30 seconds and offers only this sort of skeletal facts about whatever the crime was, a shooting at a particular neighborhood or address, maybe a victim's age, and then it's never followed up on. So I say all this to say that I often really have this feeling that the kids at school, like, their story is not being told in their words. Like, somebody has hijacked their narrative. The local media, when they report crime, is kind of hijacking this narrative, and it's not getting told from the perspective of the people closest to these experiences, and they're not getting the people closest to these experiences. Crime coverage is like the bread and butter of nightly news. It appears on every nightly news episode. I try not to watch it. It's brief, but it's always there. And and the people who are actually experiencing it are not able to tell, are not being allowed to tell their stories.
You had mentioned earlier about complexities, about how a situation or a person is very complex. And I think that is something that is happening in that nightly news, is that they're just breaking it down to one thing, and the other aspects, facets, or the complexity of that whole issue, the perspective, like you said, is being lost.
Right. If you're going to report a crime story and you have no names and just like a sort of handful of basic facts, it's really a kind of dehumanization, because it kind of trivializes the story. I'll put on the nightly news tonight, and they might report a violent crime, a gun crime, but at the end of the breaking news, I'll know very little. So by inference, it kind of trivializes the people who are affected by this, because it's almost as if the newscasters or news outlets are saying the people affected aren't worth enough or aren't valuable enough to actually report this story in full. We're just going to entice viewers with a cry-on that says breaking news. That has offended me for a long time.
Yeah, just a little snippet to just,
Right.
We have another question here. Have you joined a book club with kids from West Baltimore?
Um,
Or have you initiated any book clubs?
yeah, I have not done that. Though things like that do occur to me, but I haven't done anything like that. Yeah.
Um, I do. I think it is very interesting to get a perspective that is different, and especially from like a different generation's perspective or a different person's perspective, because we can look at something from our own point of view.
Mhm.
However, that's not the way anybody else will look at it,
Yeah.
and I think that's really very important.
Mhm.
We we've had a really fascinating and great conversation, and if you have any more questions, we had some really great questions from the audience, and oh, that's another interesting question that's popped up. Uh, have you been able to ask any of your students to read the stories that you've written, or have you done any readings in school? And if so, what were their reactions? What do they feel about the people or characters that you've written? Do they feel reflected in the stories you've written?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yes, I get asked this sometimes, and I have to say that I actually keep these two things sort of separate: my writing life and my work as a teacher. I
Mhm.
do feel like when I do feel like when I'm at school, the work is about the kids, supporting the kids, and supporting students, and not about me and my writing.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I don't really share I don't I don't really share my writing with students, though they know I do it, and they know, uh, periodically there will be opportunities for me to say that to share them. I mean, I tell students I'm a writer.
Mhm.
They know. I want students to know that the upfront that you know this that the subject matter that we're working with is something that I'm genuinely enthusiastic about and matters to me. Um, and That is reading and writing. But I mostly never share my work with students, but they know they know I write about the lives of students, um, and and sometimes I run this question of cultural appropriation by them, and um, most of the time they tell me that they're not offended, but I can't be sure. They might just be telling me. They might just be sparing my feelings. Uh,
And what about your teachers, your your peers? Did do they kind of see the students reflected in your stories, or
Yeah,
um,
I've had a few colleagues read my work, and yeah, they see it, they see it, and yeah, so
that is interesting. That is a really great question. I was wondering, it would I understand your perspective about keeping your work separate from the school and what the students are doing in the classroom. However, I I also would like to know what they genuinely think, because their perspective, like a fly on the wall. I would love to know what's what they think if they read one of the stories.
right, right, yes, um, yeah. Occasionally students will ask to read my work, and I'll sometimes delay them or put them off in the hopes that they will lose track. Um, but sometimes I share my work with students, and then when they ask, and they usually say nice things, uh, and that's gratifying.
It must be also very inspiring for them to actually and very hopeful for them that you have a teacher who is written and being published, so it kind of shows you that it's something that can be done rather than something that is, you just hear about it but it never happens. So it
Yeah,
must be really.
yeah, I agree. I think that's good for students to see, and for them to hear that I've been trying to do this for many years since I was in college, and I had a lot of years of just kind of spinning my wheels and not writing stories that were, good enough to be published. And over time, um, over time, by sticking with it, I got better, and my work improved a little. And yeah, I think that's good for students to see.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us, Adam.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful to be here.
I'd like to mention that Adam's book, The Rest of the World, is available at Barnes and Nobles in Columbia, Ellicott City, and other stores. It's also available online with Books with a Past. And thank you so much. Go ahead, buy a book. You can, of course, borrow it from the library. However, all of our copies are checked out. And last time I checked, there was a wait list, but you're welcome to add yourself to that wait list too. And thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me. Um, See you. Good night.
Good night. And I'll be sending out a follow up email with the authors that Adam mentioned and a survey. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah. Good night.